The Cloverfield Paradox was released in 2018 and was directed by Julius Onah and stars Daniel Bruhl, Elizabeth Debicki, Gugu Mbatha-Raw, Chris O'Dowd, and David Oyelowo, and follows the story of a group of international astronauts that are aboard this space station that are using a particle accelerator to solve Earth's energy crisis. However, when an experiment goes wrong, they must find their way back home as Earth has mysteriously disappeared. Guys, I'm excited to talk about the Cloverfield Paradox here on the channel. This is my second time actually talking about this because this is an anniversary video. This is my 4th year on YouTube, and it has been an incredible journey. And since then, I have made it my mission every single anniversary to talk about a Cloverfield movie, because this channel started out with a Cloverfield review, and that was the Cloverfield Paradox, my first review ever on this channel back in 2018, and a lot has changed since then. My review style has changed a whole lot. I mean, the first time I reviewed this, I didn't even really have myself in front of the camera. It was just me talking, and I am not really happy with that video. I was at the time, but now I watch it and I just sound very robotic, and I was clearly reading from a script, and it just wasn't very personable. And so I have gotten a lot better with reviews since then, and so far I have reviewed all the Cloverfield movies, including Overlord, which was at one point going to be a Cloverfield film. So why not start from the very beginning of this channel at least and talk about the Cloverfield Paradox. I was really interested going back to this film, wondering how exactly I would think about it. I never thought that this film was that bad back in 2018 when it just got trashed by critics and audiences alike. But I think the marketing for this film was absolutely genius, and many people call the marketing genius, because we didn't get a trailer for this movie until the night it came out. The trailer for this movie premiered during the Super Bowl, and then it said that you could watch the movie right after the Super Bowl, and that's what many people did. And people were excited for a new Cloverfield film, especially after people loving both Cloverfield and 10 Cloverfield Lane. However, many people were rather disappointed by this film and didn't really enjoy it. Now, I am a big fan of the Cloverfield franchise. I think it's very interesting. I love the idea, at least, of taking these films that are their own films and then spicing it up by kind of connecting it to the universe. That is what they did with 10 Cloverfield Lane, and it worked so well. So Cloverfield Paradox had the chance to do the exact same thing that 10 Cloverfield Lane did. However, it was going to connect all the films together in a way that, you know, was maybe interesting and satisfying for longtime Cloverfield fans. However, that was not the case for everybody. There are some inconsistencies in this movie with the lore of the past 2 films, and it doesn't do a great job, which is the job it set out to do. The film was originally going to be a standalone film called The God Particle, and then that was it. However, when it was decided that this was going to be a Cloverfield film, they inserted scenes into the film to try to connect it to the overall universe. And I think this is where the film suffers, because it's trying to be its own film and it's trying to be a Cloverfield film, and they are constantly at odds with each other. The reason why 10 Cloverfield Lane worked so well was, for the most part, it was its own film, and then it tacked on the Cloverfield connections at the end of the film, but they did it in such a way that they set up things earlier to where it felt more organic, and it felt like the third act of that film, as different as it was from the rest of the film, it flowed together to a point where it actually did work, and it was surprising, and, it just was something that worked overall. However, cannot say the same thing about the Cloverfield Paradox. A lot of its connections are very clumsily done in scenes that feel tacked on. Every time there was a scene that connected it to the Cloverfield films, you could kind of tell that this was just a scene that was inserted maybe a little bit later in the editing room, because it just doesn't feel organic. Like early on, the scene that everybody groans at, there's this guy talking on the TV about the Cloverfield Paradox, and they mention Cloverfield every now and then, and it just feels weird and doesn't feel natural at all. However, let me get into more of the stuff that I do like with the film before we get into some of my more nitpicks and problems with it. So, I want to say first off that I love the cast for this film. The cast is excellent. From David Oyelowo to Daniel Bruhl to Gugu Mbatha-Raw to Elizabeth Debicki to Chris O'Dowd and many others. This is a really good cast, and I think they all do a serviceable job, and in some ways a really good job, particularly with Gugu Mbatha-Raw, who is our main character throughout this film. I thought they all had some great camaraderie. They're not deep characters. In fact, you don't really get to know them very well, but they all have these distinct personalities that I do think leap right off the screen. And I think some of them are dealing with some interesting issues, such as Gugu Mbatha-Raw being away from her family, and also we have Elizabeth Debicki, who is a character that is from a different timeline. And this is something very interesting with this film, dealing with multiple timelines, and it's definitely the unique part of this film. I do like the mysteries that this movie sets up and tries to solve by the end of the film. I think that stuff is really cool. I also like some of the really grotesque deaths. There's this one guy that is something is messing with his eye, and then all of a sudden he is like being eaten apart by worms. It's violent, it's crazy, and I really liked it. And then there's some other goofy stuff going on too, with Chris O'Dowd losing his arm and it, moving around and stuff. A woman getting frozen. There's this great moment at the end of the film where Elizabeth Debicki's character kind of goes rogue and begins to attack everybody, and she gets sucked outside of the ship. Also, I think for the most part, the cinematography is pretty solid. It's not that great when you're like inside the ship, but I do like the stuff that is outside the ship, particularly the shot at the beginning of the movie as the ship is flying over Earth and we get the title reveal. The music, the epic scale, it is beautifully done. I also like the design of the ship. It's an interesting ship also. However, I just don't think the film really, has much of an identity aside for being connected to the Cloverfield films. I think if it didn't have those connections, it would just be a very bland film that I feel like people still wouldn't particularly care for, honestly. It's kind of bland in a lot of ways, and that's probably its biggest crime. It's not necessarily bad, it's just kind of meh when you watch it. Now, I also really like the ending of this film, particularly with Gugu Mbatha-Raw telling herself from this different timeline about going to see her family. It's a very emotional scene, and I also like the ending where they finally get back to Earth and they are going to go down into it, and the husband is telling the astronauts to, not to let her get back to Earth because, Earth is being taken over by these creatures, and It's really good. It reminded me a lot of the ending of Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. I thought that was really cool. And then the ending with the big giant monster that kind of looks like the monster from the first Cloverfield film. It was really cool. But overall, the entire package just isn't that solid. It's mostly a bland, at times boring movie. It's got some goofy elements to it too. The tone really is kind of inconsistent. You'll have this really horrific, violent death that is straight up out of Alien, and then you'll have Chris O'Dowd's arm being cut off and moving around, which I did find really fun this time. It is goofy, but the tone just really is all over the place. Also, I talked a lot about scenes that felt inserted into the film late into production. We also get that with Gugu Mbatha-Raw's husband. There is these scenes throughout the film where we are seeing stuff on Earth from the ground level, and it feels like it's just there to connect it to Cloverfield because Earth is being taken over in a way. And it just doesn't work. It reminded me a lot of Sean Bean's scenes in the Silent Hill movie where they just don't connect to the overall narrative and feel like you could cut them out and the film would be no different. And it definitely feels that way with these scenes. They just feel unnecessary. However, I never straight up hated this film. There's nothing in this film that I'm like, oh, that was just terrible. But also, there's not much in the way of things where I'm like, oh, that was fantastic. That was great. That's a great, great moment. There are very few. So ultimately, the film is neither bad nor particularly good. It's just kind of somewhere in the middle, and it's ultimately a film that there's a reason why people have completely forgotten about this movie. The reason why it's buried within Netflix right now. For one, Paramount didn't have any, they didn't really see anything in this film. They gave it to Netflix. And it's just rather disappointing by the end because this could have been something special. It could have been another 10 Cloverfield Lane. However, it's just a bland film for the most part. And again, I feel like it would have been a bland film if it didn't have the Cloverfield connections. And I feel like having the Cloverfield connections at least gives it something. Other than that, I like the actors in it. I like the setting. I like the ideas, even though they are not executed very well. But I think the tone, the way scenes are added into the film, scenes that don't need to be there necessarily, I think it really drags the film down into kind of mediocrity. But nonetheless, it's still a film that I overall enjoyed for the most part. In fact, I can say that I enjoyed it more this time than I did the previous time, but it's still meh. It's not a film that I'm going to be revisiting a whole lot unless I'm doing a Cloverfield marathon. And yeah, it's pretty much it. It's just a okay film at the most. So anyway, guys, with all that said, I'm going to give The Cloverfield Paradox a 6 out of 10. Well, guys, I want to thank you for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for the 4 years that I have experienced on YouTube. It has been a ton of fun doing videos for you on the channel, and I hope to continue to do this throughout this year and many years to come. As for what we will be doing with anniversary videos moving forward, I don't know. There are some movies that, have been rumored to be connected to the Cloverfield universe, such as Underwater, and movies that were also kind of, at one point, going to be pitched as Cloverfield films, like A Quiet Place. So I don't know. I might review those films in the future. We may see, but for the most part, I think I'm done talking about the Cloverfield franchise until they make another movie. But anyway, guys, as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.